So we're almost ready to try adding a book on the front end. And of course, this is the form we're going to use to do that. Now, there are a few things about this form that I'm not really happy about. For example, I don't like publication year showing up as a 0 when I'm adding a form. I'd rather have this blank. And the second thing is I could actually put in a year like this, 19 whatever, okay? And that's text. But in the database, that's actually an int. So how are we going to address this? Well, it actually turns out to be pretty easy. Let's go back to the front end and look at the bookEdit.view component. And the first thing I'm going to do is come down here to where the publication year is. And I'm going to change its input from type equals text to type equals number. And because we're using a nice component for this, that's all we have to do for that. Now it's going to show up as a number. And it won't accept text values. Like you can't type the word 19. And the second thing I'll do is I'll come down here to the part where I'm initializing my data, and I won't set publication year to 0. Instead, I'll just set it to null, which I have to spell right. Null. And with that one change, when I go back to my form now it shows up as publication year empty, and I have this little indicator here, which is supplied by the browser, and it's different for different browsers, that allows me to choose a number. And if I try to type 19 in there, so 19, and try to save this, first of all, I'll get a warning that I'm missing lots of data, but that's not what I want you to focus on. Now, if I change this to, say, 1977, it turns green. But if I try to type 6 in there, it stays red. So now I know I'm going to get the data in the right format. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to look at. Now let's get started with finding out whether or not we can actually submit a form. And I'm going to do that by coming down to the part that says Submit Handler right here. So I'm going to comment out this entire fetch statement. Okay, and instead, I'm just going to console log payload. So rather than actually doing the fetch, I'm going to look at the console and see if all the information in payload is correct. Okay, so let's make sure it recompiled. It did. And let's go back to our browser. And I'll choose some cover because it's a required field. So I'll go to the desktop and choose this cover. And I'll put in a title, my title. The author, I'll set to, say, Mark Twain. The publication year, I'll set to 1892. The description, some description. And I'll choose, say, fantasy and classic as my two possible things. Now I'll open the JavaScript console. And I'll try saving this. So there is my returned value. Let's look at it. So we have the cover, we have the author ID, we have the description, we have two genre IDs, the ID is 0, the publication is 1892, the slug is empty as I expected. Everything seems to be working properly. Perfect. So let's go back to our code and comment out the console log. And uncomment the fetch statement. My backend is running, my Docker images are running, and this is running, so let's try submitting a form. So, in the course resources for this lecture, you'll see a book cover you can download, and the book is A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. So you might want to download that if you want to follow along exactly. And if you do, you'll be able to select a file once you download it and put it somewhere on your computer. And it's called A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. So I'll select that. And the title is obviously A Connecticut, which is a weird spelling, but that's how it's spelled, Yankee in King Arthur's Court. And the author is Mark Twain, so let's choose Mark Twain. And the publication year for this book is actually 1889. And the description, I've copied it and pasted it, because I had it on my clipboard. Hank Morgan, a skilled mechanic at 19th century New England arms factory, is struck on the head during a quarrel and awakens to find himself among the knights and magicians of King Arthur's Camelot. And this is a classic, so I'll just put classic. Now, let's open our JavaScript terminal just to make sure that we can watch in case there's actually any errors. Let's try submitting this and see what happens. So, cannot unmarshal string into go struct field. So that was my error. Let's just look at and see what we got here. We're bound to have at least one thing wrong. Publication year of type int. Cannot unmarshal string. Okay, so let's go back to our code. And I need to make sure that when I post this, which is right, it's on the submit handler. Okay, this needs to be in the form of an int. That's no problem. So we'll say parse int. And we'll make it base 10. And that should be all I have to do for that. So it looks like I recompiled. I'll go back to my form again. And I'll reload the whole thing just to make sure it's current. And clear my JavaScript console and try again. So I'll find the book cover. I'll put in the title, a Connecticut, which is pronounced Connecticut, Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Author is Mark Twain. The year is 1889. Paste in the description and make it a classic. Let's save it again. Okay, there it is. It's saved. It's in my database. Now, of course, the next problem is when I click on this, it still stays empty. So now we need to set up a handler that lets us get an existing book from the database as JSON and populate the necessary values in our state and then display it in this form. And we'll get started on that in the next lecture.